Good like Tuesday, early Wednesday meteorologist Casey Cloud here in the Weather Center right now, giving a look at that Doppler technology across the region. You see, not even everybody under a general thunderstorm risk on that Wednesday, as we do have a pattern here with Aaron off the coast by a pretty good distance. That's actually going to reduce those storm chances there locally, but still a little bit of a chance, and they're about 30% here. As we're looking, you even see a little bit of rain there just north of Albany right now, but not too big of a deal. But as we look ahead, we're going to see some more moisture here as we get closer toward the weekend. Now, high school football action there may get disrupted, unfortunately, by some storm action here. So we have to remember whenever thunder roars, go indoors, obviously, as we're looking at all of that. I know a situation here where we're watching a boundary. We're going to try to get maybe a little bit of cool air come on in. We'll see. I mean, in quotation marks as we get toward next week. I mean, it's not going to be that prominent on the board, but we'll kind of say that here in just a moment. You see temperature-wise right now, 75 around Keystone, 76 Gainesville, 77 Tallahassee. Pretty warm. We're a little cooler here east of Stark right now, more rural area, 72 degrees here. As we're kind of looking at tracking things, of course, we are looking at Hurricane Aaron. That's the big weather story here as we're kind of tracking the overall meteorological scenario right now. So let me go ahead and kind of start to broaden the view. You do see here all the acts, and I have so much on here. Hurricane hunters out there and the like, and I have everything kind of checked on here, but I'll go ahead and clear some more of this off the screen so you get a better look at what we're dealing with. And, you know, we're lucky as, you know, well off the coast here, not getting any direct, you know, adverse impacts over land as we're looking at things and as we're tracking things. That's obviously some great news here as we're monitoring the overall meteorological pattern. You see the white 2s, 3s here on the board, and indication of the path. Now, there is a little bit more concern toward eastern North Carolina, but first off, toward our area, our Atlantic coastal areas could have at high tide a little bit of minor coastal flooding, but we're, you know, again, really lucky this is way off. I mean, there is a storm surge warning for a little bit of North Carolina, but this is, you know, several hundred miles away here as we're looking, as we're tracking. I mean, about its closest point to Jacksonville, and I might have went a little far. I'll just kind of put my marker over. I mean, we're talking about maybe about 400 or so miles. So a little bit closer than what we were talking about last week, but still not by much. But it's going to be dangerous there at the area beaches. So be mindful of that. Not turn the logo red, but, you know, rip currents can be deadly. A high risk of rip currents. So don't go in the water, you know, unless you're a really strong swimmer. And then even then, exercise caution, because it could still be deadly as well for those that are strong swimmers. Maybe just stay on the sand there. Could have some coastal flooding too. You know, talking about our local area, of course, there's storm surge warnings in play for a small sliver of areas there in northern, you know, areas there of the southeast per se, or eastern parts of North Carolina, or the Outer Banks. But having some evacuations there, that's more because there's some, you know, significant vulnerabilities because you know, the Outer Banks there and the like, and being close enough here to stir some surge, maybe 2 to 4 feet in a few areas there above ground level. So something to keep in mind, even though it's still going to be a couple hundred miles this with the center off the coast. It's a big hurricane here, so that's why you see the wind field just barely clipping with those tropical storm winds, the Outer Banks, North Carolina. But yeah, locally here, you know, we have the coastal flood advisory, not a warning as of last check here. I'll double check again, but you know, warning would be something a little more serious. But just an advisory here. Still be careful. High tide could have some issues there, but toward the Atlantic areas, and then, you know, we're talking about high surf, very high surf, some, you know, breakers 7 to 11 feet at times there in the overall period ahead. And talking about, again, rip current risk here as we're looking and as we're tracking things here. So just be very mindful of that. You know, that rip current risk through Friday evening is going to be high. So really, you know, this is a beach week for you. Really, it's advisable not to go underwater. We don't want tragedies to happen here unless you're really, really know what you're doing. As we're looking at this, I know Weather Service Jackson, we're talking about flood to blocks, parks, and roads with only isolated road closures expected here. That's the coastal flood advisory, and that's really around high tide, like 5 to 11 p.m. on this Wednesday ahead. But we're talking about inexperienced swimmers that remain out of the water due to dangerous surf conditions. That's what they're saying. I'm going a little further, but this goes not just for our beaches, but a lot of beaches up and down the eastern seaboard. Swim near a lifeguard. If caught in a rip current, relax and float. Don't swim there against a current. If unable, swim in a direction following the shore line. If unable to escape, face the shore and call or wave for help. So very important to keep in mind. You got to be really careful here with these heightened rip currents as we're tracking here. Now, this storm system getting about as close as it's going to get here as we're looking here now, as we're tracking toward our region. But it's still way, way away, obviously, which is some good news here as we're looking at the overall meteorological patterns. So that's, what we're seeing, what we're dealing with right now. Let me go ahead, I'll pull this back 4 hours ago, and that to now you kind of maybe see maybe a little bit of that hurricane expanding here a bit again, not, they go back and forth. The idea of the overall pattern, expecting this to get a little bit bigger here. Again, we do have that, really high rip current risk, as high as you'll get. Really, the high surf and the coastal flood advisory for locally, but again, we're not turning local red at land areas. Actually better weather today because of this proximity, bringing some dry air, a little bit warm though, 294, so is what I got for that high. As we're looking here and as we're tracking things, I know we do have the alerts in play here, where they storm surge warning effect for Cape Lookout to Duck, North Carolina, about 2 to 4 feet of storm surge above ground level possible there, so we might have, advised about that. And then a tropical storm warning effect for areas there of North Carolina, including Pamlico and Albemarle Sounds. We're talking about areas around Duck, North Carolina, that part of the state there, and the tropical storm watch all the way up into Virginia, and then even for Bermuda. I mean, Bermuda, you don't get that often where you have out here, as we'll kind of take off a couple things to see the geography. Way out here we have a tropical storm watch, and then you have alerts, warning, and watches as we go further up the coast here. So that's not something we deal with that often, but that's what we're dealing with right now. In fact, let me go to our other source here, other graphic source, because I have a display of the tropical storm warning here that's showing up in our system. You see some of these areas impacted there in North Carteret County. You see in this red, it doesn't go very far in, but Ocracoke there, Hatteras. You can kind of see the idea in this maroonish color tropical storm warning effect. Again, it doesn't go that far in at all. I mean, not even to New Bern or Jacksonville, North Carolina, but just right along the coast here. Could have gusts, they're a little above the, threshold for tropical storm force there. And sustained winds could reach tropical storm force. We're talking about, sustained winds of 39 miles an hour or greater just in these confined areas and further east generally, but gusts a little higher maybe, and the tropical storm gusts could get a little further in and where this warning is. But you see North Topsail Beach, you see, again, this is very confined to what you can get. I mean, we've had storm systems like around here with Dorian. It was terrible, just a disaster in the Bahamas there, but we kind of got scraped, I would say situation here, was one where it wasn't too bad. It could have been catastrophic. Here, we never had that on the table to be catastrophic. I mean, if it would have went right to Orem Aaron, Hurricane Aaron, they name on the list, that would be a problem. But that's not what we're dealing with right now here as we're looking and as we're tracking things. So that's the good news as we're giving you guys the latest here. I mean, it's even a lesser threat than what we had with Dorian here locally. And 2 to 4 feet above ground, and just some spots there. That's about what you get in a coastal flood warning around here. So for them, there's some vulnerable spots. I mean, there's some houses that are vulnerable, some roads that are vulnerable. So there have been some evacuations ordered because of that. Kind of unusual to have this with tropical storm, this far away, to have just some evacuations. It's just an area here that's somewhat more vulnerable because of the topography and the like here. You see Ocracoke, you see Hatteras, you see Salvo there, Kill Devil Hills, and then you get further up in the other pinkish color there versus the maroonish color. You see, this is tropical storm watch. So just in case things want to set Virginia Beach under this, but I didn't go too far in. I'll switch over so you can see this better, the geography. But I didn't even go in there that much you know, but as you're looking as you track a few areas under this tropical storm watch around the coast there in Virginia. So again, not overly concerned, obviously. Again, though, some areas are more vulnerable. You know, here Outer Banks, I mean, some evacuations, you know, ordered because of the vulnerability that is tropical storm warning. We'll watch the situation here, and if we feel like we need to cut in, you know, because we do cut ins for like landfall. I did it for the system they're going back earlier this year, you know, in the North Carolina. It wasn't that long ago as we were looking at things, as we were tracking things. Chantal, you know, it wasn't that big of a deal. And this here, we have some evacuations at its closest point. Maybe we need to cut in for a few minutes. But I mean, it's a really, you know, fringe type impact, a real scraper of a situation. So I don't want to, you know, kind of really push this too big here. I mean, as we're looking, as we're tracking, of course, you know, Chantal wasn't even a big headline at the time. It was all that terrible flooding there in Texas, in the Hill Country, because of, in part, a little bit in part, because of the remnant of Tropical Storm Barry, which wasn't, I don't think, even a tropical storm when it hit Mexico, and then it kind of, you know, not something we're really paying attention to. It wasn't a whole reason it happened, but all this fatalities in Texas, that's not something that was really covered until it was already, you know, over there in terms of the national coverage. But as we're looking here, as we're tracking, you can kind of see here the Outer Banks of North Carolina, some wind impact. This right here on the timeline is early Thursday, like around sunrise Thursday. Again, it's just so when the Outer Banks getting scraped here. I mean, the wind from this here could be, you know, kind of pushing some water in. Let's see that part, because that's probably the bigger story here. That's the reason the evacuations were ordered. You know, not because, you know, I'm not talking about rainfall either. I'm just talking about surge. Let's go ahead and see some of that, because that's really, if we were to cut in here for it, it's not sure if we need to, really we might, but it's so far away. I mean, let me go ahead and just get some stuff up here real quick. So we're going to do some model overlays here. Let's do that. And then we'll go ahead and put the model fill on. You know, and I'll move this back down for where it is now. We'll just kind of do the progression. This is all on the fly here with this system. So let me go ahead and just kind of watch it here. You see really the overall pattern. We're going to get in some dry area, I know, on this Wednesday around here, around the local area in general. I mean, but that's not going to last too much. You see here, this is 5 p.m. maybe, you know, just the fringe of the moisture here, the envelope kind of getting in there toward parts of the Outer Banks. I mean, you can kind of see we're just kind of monitoring things there, and then as we kind of look, as we track her, this is the American model, if you're wondering what I'm showing. You know, just some of these areas that are more vulnerable, if you have the stronger wind arrows come in, you know, coming in different points there. But eventually you see the wind kind of, it'll eventually turn. This is into Thursday, later Thursday afternoon, things start to turn here. And then, you know, they're not as strong as we get into Friday. So it's not even, I mean, there will be peaks of this and, you know, high tide, vulnerability there, but it's not something that's an overwhelming pattern that's, you know, really, really obvious with some of this. As we're looking at, as we're tracking things here, I'm going to pull up the HRRR as well. Again, this is not a, you know, it's a well-defined system, very well-defined, but it's way to the east compared to what we're really, you know, focused on here. This is HRRR, and it's not a tropical model, and it kind of, you can see it cuts it off on the eastern side, because this is more for, you know, the U.S. and for, like, severe weather and the like. But we're going to use it because you can kind of see some, you know, little intricacies here with the overall pattern as we watch the progress in here. See some pop-ups that were in North Carolina, I mean, but we're not, it's just getting into, you know, a little bit later. Let me go ahead and put on the model overlay here. You can see isobars. I'm going to take the isobars off there. You got the idea with it, but it's going to clutter it up a little. I'm going to take those off here real quick as we're looking and as we're tracking things. I know I'm just switching a couple things up. So let me just take everything off just for a split second as we kind of give you guys the very latest on the situation here. I'm just trying to keep you guys safe and informed, obviously. Just trying to keep you guys up to date here on the overall meteorological scenario. I'm going to go ahead and pull some more things in here. So there you go, without the isobars. And we'll watch this progress in here. Winds get a little stronger there toward the Outer Banks and puts in some water, different spots. Sometimes I almost want to say it's not as easy for somebody to kind of understand this here if they're not as familiar with the Outer Banks, because this isn't like it's obvious when the wind's pushing the water away from around here. There's not like two different spots, but the thing is, it can kind of come across on the other side here, because of the water in between, and that can kind of push some stuff up. So we got to be mindful of that. But you can see this is getting into early Thursday here when we have the closest approach tropical storm type winds. Maybe let's see that wind field there. I know as we're tracking, definitely some strong winds here right around the Outer Banks. These purples here indicative of tropical storm sustained winds. And the red is just kind of under that, but the purple goes about tropical storm sustained. And you see how it's just kind of right on the edge. I'll scrub back a little. This is like Thursday around sunrise. You see it, maybe a little bit of gust there, a little bit stronger at times, in there. But and you see right there, I mean, this is like 2 a.m. Let's scrub back again. 2 a.m. Thursday, 3 a.m. according to H4, 4 a.m., 5 a.m. Again, it's about pushing the water in some of these areas, that are in certain spots based on the wind direction. It's gonna, because wind's coming from the northeast at this point. So some areas are not gonna. Some people kind of compare this to a nor'easter away, and some areas aren't gonna have it because of where they're at compared to other areas because of the way the wind's pushing here in the Outer Banks. But you see, I mean, this is, if it wasn't because of some vulnerabilities locally, I mean, these are not that high rainfall totals at all. I mean, according to this, I mean, it sips a little bit maybe so, in that you get an inch or two in the Outer Banks from this, but I mean, this is not even so, and some of those blues, maybe a half inch, as we're looking for a 6-hour period, and even then it kind of just fades. I mean, there's evacuations because of the surge fatted out, because nor'easter, I mean, you that type of thinking here, is in play because you don't have a nor'easter, maybe you don't call that a landfall or anything. So this is the overall wind pattern causing the water to get 2 to 4 feet above ground level there in some spots in North Carolina with the storm surge warning effect. So that's what we're kind of dealing with, that storm surge warning effect there from Cape Lookout to Duck, North Carolina. So just got to be kind of mindful of that there with, again, 2 to 4 feet above ground level. That is, something where, again, we talked about tsunami acting with 5 feet there out toward some spots. That was, something that kind of came up that wasn't overwhelming, but it's a local story that's important. It can be a big deal locally here as we're looking toward parts of North Carolina. But again, in the grand scheme of things, we've seen way worse storm surge over the years. I mean, it still could cause some issues, but let's pull this up here. I think I have my door out here. I'm going back to 2019. That was, actually did kind of have a landfall here in North Carolina. But here's a storm surge. It can cause some danger, 2 to 4 feet. If the maximum got into a few homes there, then sure. But really, I mean, you get coastal flood warnings, advisories around that level even, and you don't even have to have a hurricane for that. I mean, as we're tracking things, so. Still a big local story up there, sure, but not, just for that one TV market, or maybe going in a couple, because you have the Greenville market, which doesn't even really impact Greenville that much at all. But, there are eastern areas and Outer Banks and then into Virginia. They're a little closer to the coast with some more population, but they're just under a couple of storm watch. So I get 2 to 4 feet. That's about the worst case scenario that we're thinking right now. So some areas to the north and to the south could get 1 to 3 feet above ground level, all the way from South Santee River, South Carolina to Cape Lookout, North Carolina, and then from Duck, North Carolina up into Virginia, and maybe, we'll see, some of that could get further up, but Duck and Cape Lookout, in between those points, they're 2 to 4 feet above ground level. So, again, that's kind of the storyline there. I just zoomed in. If you see a few scattered sprinkles there right now, as we're looking again, could be some, areas that are vulnerable that, this does exploit the vulnerabilities, but we don't want to overhype this here. This is not a monster storm making landfall in the U.S. or anything like that. So, you know, this is not. We've had so many bad storms lately, and this is not that, but some local impacts for a few spots up there, sure. Okay, as we go ahead and look here, you see where Aaron is on this map. Early went to Hurricane Center update. A couple of areas we're watching. We'll watch that one area in yellow. Low chance of development in the next 7 days here. On the orange is a medium chance. We need to watch it some, but I'm feeling quite a bit better than I was even just a few days ago. Looking at some of the model guidance here, it was, painted a picture here. Some of the runs taking something maybe closer to Florida, but it's looking like a pattern now is becoming less, maybe quite a bit less likely for anything here in the, next 7+ days at least, getting closer to Florida with something, from way out in the Atlantic. I mean, you can always have homegrown stuff. Some models have hinted at something like that, a weaker system homegrown, but a stronger system coming from the Atlantic. We saw that in some of the model runs, as late as Monday I saw it in the GFS run, and then since then it's Roy, and the pattern Roy, indicates this as well. It does not look like that's probably going to happen now. We're doing something a week from now, closer to Florida. DFS was maybe a stronger system. That's not the case anymore, and that's good news, obviously. There, and we had a lot of confidence way out that it was going to turn. Still watch the orange area that could develop into our next name on the list of Fernan, but again, I wouldn't be too stressed about it right now. The indications are of that taking the turn. That's most likely what's going to happen. But could have something homegrown, some models have it, a little something like that. Could have a good bit of moisture. European models showing quite a bit of rain coming up, toward our region. Doesn't mean it's tropical. There's other triggers for that. You have nor'easters even, and this is getting toward, September around here. So there's other, things that can cause issues here, including that storms, for those football games. Unfortunately, for Friday night, it's looking pretty wet. Maybe some storms, maybe some, strong storms even in a few backyards. Friday night, right at the wrong time for those football games here as we're tracking things. The high school games, it's the first week of the games that count in the state of Florida. I know Georgia had them last week that counted, but, we are going to have, too bad the high school games aren't being played here on this Wednesday as we're looking around our area, because the weather will be a lot more ideal versus Friday. We have a boundary coming in that's going to try to give us cooler air, but, cool front trying to get closer here per se. But a scenario here where it's really, if we just had the games win this Wednesday, maybe some of the, some of the acts, and I think middle school is playing Tuesday around here. Maybe some games, I don't know if JV plays Wednesday or not, but maybe some games will have better weather, because by Friday night it's looking pretty stormy because of a frontal boundary, not because of the tropics here locally. So as we go ahead and look here at the list, again, Fernan, the next name after that, you see our G name, our H name. We go watch, you see Hurricane Aaron, local Atlantic marine impacts, minor coastal flooding, high tide like 5 to 11 p.m. on this Wednesday toward the eastern areas there. As we're looking, it's not a big deal. May have some more that'll repeat as we look ahead. We'll see. But getting to its closest point here, I know high surf and rip currents. We gotta be really careful. That's the thing. The minor coastal flooding. I mean, be careful, of course. Turn around, don't run. If somehow we get 6 inches of flowing water on 1 or 2 roads, I mean, I don't necessarily see that much here. You always got to be careful. Remember, we have our flash flood precautions, not expecting flash flood warnings from this, but, it's just always be careful. High surf, though, and then the rip currents, of course, high surf shouldn't be surfing if you don't know how to surf, in this weather for sure. And then the rip currents here, that is what can be, deadly, very serious situation with that. I mean, I don't want to just call it an alert because of that, but, that can and does, has and will claim lives. Rip currents here, that is just, awful. I mean, lightning, you have the thunder warning from that. The heat, though, you don't have much warning from that, and that could be an issue someone that's Thursday, or on this Wednesday, I should say, some on Thursday as well. But rip currents here, that is a silent killer for sure. Heat somewhat, but the rip current, that is very something you gotta take heed of, because all of a sudden you are in big trouble and you gotta swim to this, you gotta swim parallel to the shore to stay alive is the mantra there with rip current. If you get caught, and want to stay calm as well as you're looking at that. I mean, you really, rip currents, can just be awful. Just swim near a lifeguard if you really want to be out there. But if caught in a rip current, relax and float. Don't swim against the current. If able, swim in a direction following the shoreline. If unable to escape, face the shore and call or wave for help here. Again, it's just so important to be very mindful. You know, the rip currents are just so serious. You got to take them, as such. Swim parallel to the shoreline, not against it. They're pretty narrow, but swimming sideways there, they can help you. They can really help you as we're tracking things here in these type of instances. Just don't fight them. You need to swim parallel to the shoreline. Remain calm. Very important. You panic, it's not a good thing. Just Aaron, that could be, we could have local fatalities because of the Aaron, even though it's 400 or 500 miles away because of the rip currents at the coast. That is, if you're not in the water, you'll be alright. But if you're in the water, if you're not just on the sand, these rip currents, they can be deadly. They can claim lives. Now, not because of the tropics at all. We do have a couple of warnings in Montana tonight. Severe weather wide nationally. So let me see that real quick before, we get too much further, because you don't always have active warnings this late at night. These are far northern Montana here. Some warnings up that way, and then as we look ahead into toward that Wednesday here, you see, let's see this real quick. There's a tornado risk up toward Minot, North Dakota. And then as you look here, there's a marginal severe weather risk here as you're looking toward parts of Texas, Louisiana, a little bit of Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama there, a little bit of Georgia too. Wind risk, damaging winds possible in a few spots, with boundary in place. So as we're tracking things. So it's kind of worth monitoring there as we're looking at the grand scheme of things. Just always important to kind of stay on top of the overall scenario here. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up our tropical climatology after we see this one more time with this. Again, just be mindful, local Atlantic marine impacts, minor coastal flooding, high surf, and rip currents here from Aaron. Again, up and down eastern seaboard, we have some of those concerns. The concern that becomes more, enhanced is right there in the Outer Banks of North Carolina, where we have a storm surge warning for parts of North Carolina. That's where you have some evacuations, because there are some vulnerabilities that Aaron could exploit here, even though it's not, that close at all, and it's not hurricane conditions coming toward the U.S. by any stretch. We could have some of those tropical storm gusts, but that's not the biggest problem. The rainfall, not much of a problem. It's the storm surge that, that beats issue there, where you have that water trying to push in maybe 2 to 4 feet over ground level there. Less here, just a minor coastal flooding at high tide possible as we're looking here and as we're tracking. So very far away from us. Still pretty far from North Carolina, the center, but enough to cause some evacuations. I know, you see the total climatology, we're starting to get closer toward that peak season here. We're, looking, and as we're tracking that here, I know, we're just going to kind of look here at this when it peaks towards September 10th or so. So just be very mindful here of that, as, the next few weeks. Could watch some more storms, even the models aren't showing as the last check now. Where they could start to pop things up as quickly as they dropped them. You just never know. But right now, things look pretty good here. As we're tracking things. So we're just going to continue to give you guys the latest things. Can always switch around here. They can always shift around here pretty quick. But right now, we're looking pretty good locally. Again, sometimes you get homegrown stuff that happens real quick. I know Tropical Storm Mindy a few years ago toward Tallahassee comes to mind with that. That's nothing we talk about much, but it's still an impactful system with some tornado warnings around, some wind, some rain. You see next 7 days in terms of rainfall, more because of that boundary here, not because of our storm system Aaron. You see Aaron, even toward the Outer Banks of North Carolina, not really enhancing rain that much. It's about to surge. More rain in Georgia, South Carolina with this, boundary here coming in play. And trying to bring cooler air, maybe some 60s into South Georgia next week, upper 60s for the lows. But not everybody's seeing that, But you see the path. If this was over or a lot closer to the coast, we'd have a lot bigger storyline on our hands here. But you see all that rain out toward the Atlantic, but that's not an issue toward our area here by any stretch with the precip from Aaron. Clardo.com/radar. It gives you an interactive look at things when we're, not on the air. You can look it up when we're on the air, though, as well. So that's something to kind of keep in mind here as we're tracking things, as we're monitoring things. Covered area here in Noyoka County. Of course, we're in Bradford County, always on top of things here toward the 62 counties as we're watching things here. We're just always trying to keep you guys informed, always on pretty tornado warning storms locally here. So something to be mindful of. We haven't had any lately, though, which we like. It's been a pretty, lowering tornado warning year so far toward our local area. We'll take that for sure. I mean, especially the Jacksonville part of it. So that's something to very much keep in mind here as we're looking at things. Probably the biggest weather story of the year so far, and, is late, so I might forget something here, but I'd say local story, biggest one so far of the year is in January, the winter storm. I mean, Dougherty County, Lee County area, in Georgia, some of those spots, getting a half foot of snow. Remarkable, but Bradford County, just very, very tiny little snow grains, snow flurries, whatever you want to call them, so it didn't happen here in terms of all that, so. As we're kind of looking at things, as we're kind of tracking things here, trying to give you guys the very latest. Now, one spot that does get snow a little bit more often is the heartland of the country. Southeast Missouri, southern Illinois, western Kentucky, northwest Tennessee. You do see here last 12 hours some rain, though, not snow, not in August here. You see some areas there around I-55, a few inches of rain there. As we're tracking things. So, just something to kind of keep in mind as we're looking there. That's the last 12 hours. We had some storms up there, some severe warnings. I have to zoom in on Cape Girardeau because now I only met them twice there, but when I interned at KFVS 12 there in 2015, I was mainly with Grant, I only met Brian Allworth twice. But he announced his retirement on that Tuesday. Their Heartland legend from KFVS 12 after about 38 years or so on the air in the Heartland, starting, I believe, in December of 1987. At the station there, KFVS 12, he announced his retirement. Congratulations to him. Someone who's been there so long for the Heartland and, going to retire on September 19th. Doing morning weather there in the breakfast show for so many years, decades there, keeping everybody safe and informed. Morning meteorologist there, retiring in about a month from KFVS 12, Brian Allworth. So, met him a couple times, seemed like a nice guy. Congratulations on your retirement. And Grant Day there, chief meteorologist. That's who I was with, most of the time there, but with the evening folks there, but as you look here toward parts of southern Illinois, some, accent here on the radar, some lightning even right now at 1:44 a.m. Central Time or so, just south of Marion, Illinois, southeast of Carbondale, Southern Illinois University, just southeast of them. Speaking of universities, I know UF is moving in there and about to start up classes on that Thursday there in Gainesville, FSU. Going to be starting here pretty soon as well. With those classes, it's time to get those semesters started. We already had those, situations here where we had all the primary, secondary schools really get back into play, and now it's about time to start those classes there at the universities on Monday. I know it's going to be FSU. I know one sad thing down that Tuesday, FSU, we continue to remember the life and legacy of former FSU president and FSU president emeritus, John Thrasher. I know, there took his hand for graduation for the class reigns there. He's president. Later point of my time at FSU, he passed away a few months ago, and FSU they're having celebration there per se of his life on that Tuesday. So That was there at that area there. I believe it was right by the bricks there at FSU. Ruby Diamond Center. He was remembered there on Tuesday, passing away, not too long ago. Thoughts and prayers out to his family. As we go ahead and switch back on over right now, though, to award some other information here. You see the planning forecast now, 30% chance of that rain here on that Wednesday. Pretty low, some dry air. You see rain chances jump up, though, unfortunately. Not everybody's going to have the storms, at high school football time. Some will get them earlier, but, some will have them. Georgia's probably a little more likely to get them than Florida in theory. But some spots in Florida probably have some problems, too. Whenever Thunder roars, you got to go indoors at high school games. I know Bradford and Baker here going to be hopefully getting it going Friday night, but there could be some delays, could be some problems. Maybe best. I wouldn't postpone anything because stuff's too scattered. We do have a boundary coming here, and that's an issue. But, stuff will still be not, just widespread. It's not like a hurricane's coming. Don't just postpone things because, it's not a guarantee something bad's happening Friday night with the storms. But, there may be, wanting to be plans here that are ones, of an alternative nature. Let me try that again. Alternative nature. Maybe, Saturday morning, finishing things up Saturday afternoon. It's still going to be stormy then, though. Maybe just even Monday have an alternative plan to try to get games in a few spots. Go with the Friday plan, try it. But, some areas are going to have issues. Try it Friday night. If you get lucky, some spots will get lucky, I would say, based on the model guidance I've seen. Some spots won't. That's kind of how it's going to go Friday night, probably. Georgia, probably a little bit more likelihood of it being unlucky than Florida, but, some spots in Florida probably have some problems, too. Maybe, some spots a little delay and then it'll be okay, but, some spots not so much. So, keep that in mind as we're tracking things. 62 counties, and some areas will probably just get hammered at the wrong time. Some spots will be fine. This is how it is. So maybe we'll get lucky and we'll get more development earlier on, but it's going to have a boundary type pattern in it where you could still get a focal point even toward the evening there. So didn't particularly like what I saw in the modeling for Friday night. Be alert for, storms Friday night. Have those ponchos handy, sure, but some of that, not going to be solved by just having a poncho on because there could be a lightning danger. Folks may have to go to their vehicles here for a little bit. It was a long time ago, like 20 years ago. I remember going to a Bradford game that had a delay. I'm only 31, but about 20 years ago, it was a while back, waiting in that car for a while before the delay was over. Sometimes because of field conditions, they might delay things, push things up, but a lot of times, normally it's about the lightning. Whenever thunder roars, you got to go indoors. You got to be safe here as we're looking and as we're tracking things. So, see the temperature pattern here as we're looking. You see a little bit of a better one in that it's not going to be as rainy or as warm by next Tuesday. 71 for the low and 91 for the high. We don't have as much rain around. Starting to see signs. Eventually we're going to get closer to fall, but it's taking its time getting here. We're almost to Labor Day weekend. That's next weekend already. We have all those college football games that are already going next weekend. That's also getting closer to the peak of hurricane season. Hopefully the weather will cooperate for those big games like Alabama, Florida State, and Tallahassee. It's too early to say. This time of year we have storm problems. Talking about afternoon storms that could cause delays. FSU's unveiling of their renovated Doak Campbell Stadium, probably Bowden Field, and definitely could be storms too far out to know on that. But Friday night, this week, that's when I'm really, wanting you guys to be careful because some storms, will be, adverse for some areas here locally with the high school games. That impact there definitely could be felt here. That's not what you want to see. In fact, let me go ahead and put the model guidance because, sometimes I talk about stuff and it maybe don't always get the message here. I don't want to, overdo this. It's not like it's an alert, logo or something because of the high school issues. But otherwise, I see a few people watching there on YouTube and the like. Ken from Mobile, and then we have another viewer there. Looks like watching there from Massachusetts there. So appreciate everybody tuning in and trusting me. Obviously, as we're looking, we're all about focusing on North Florida, South Florida. We're covering the national stories here as necessary, obviously. But yeah, let me get our GFS up. That's the big local story. I mean, other than the rip currents, for the land areas, for the water areas, rip currents, yeah, they can be deadly. As we're looking at things, for the land areas, of course, heat can be problematic too. But the lightning, Friday night, it could be an issue here. I mean, what I'm gonna say here, and you'll kind of see what I'm talking about. Bear with me. You don't see the lightning on this, but my point is, this is 5 o'clock. It didn't look that bad, but 8 o'clock, actually see an increase in coverage, especially in Georgia. Again, Florida, maybe all right. I mean, some model runs are going to do different things. You see, like, maybe the SOS Flagler being an issue, but a lot of the other Florida areas being all right. But, like, they're around, some of the spots in towards southwest Georgia, south central, not so much, because that's a pretty widespread pattern. And then look at that. It pushes even more by, like, 11. That's not ideal. So, see the NAM model, I don't know, sometimes, and that one's not going to go out far enough. But this one here, some of these models overdo things, but this is showing a lot more on that Friday. Yikes, there's still some uncertainty here. I mean, not, the best model we've ever used here in the meteorology world. Don't get me wrong. I generally wouldn't, I would like to use HRRR for Friday, but we don't go all the way to Friday night yet. But 5 o'clock, 8 o'clock, that's a whole different picture. And that storms all around Jacksonville, into where Baker County. I'm surprised that far apart. I don't, I'm just using it because it's available here. But I look at like Euro model for my forecasting a little bit more. I don't love to use this one on the air, to be quite honest, for Friday night. But it's just another opinion here. And you see something quite a bit different than what the GFS was doing. It's doing thunderstorms that would really be, problematic, maybe even strong, maybe even severe, right around that Florida-Georgia border here, at the wrong time, 7, 8 o'clock, Friday night. Some of the models, these actually don't go out far enough. You can't really tell in here, but this is like Thursday, some of that there. But as we're tracking things. So, we're just going ahead and giving you guys the latest here. With the storyline, of course, we are watching, albeit it's not, that local land effect. It's not a monster hurricane coming toward the U.S., even though it's been hyped up like that by some folks. Seems like in toward, the fringe meteorology world, but that's not the storyline here. That's not what we're down with. So, we're still going to have problems. Still can be deadly, though, because of the rip current. So, not something to hype up. We do, here in the Weather Center, if it's necessary, if we need to tell you there's a big problem, we'll hype it up because there's a danger there. Hyping up the rip current risk, sir. Don't just, say it's 20 miles west and that's going to be a big issue here. So, that's not how this works with this. We've had so many bad hurricanes the last several years in this country. This is not one of those, but there will be some fringe impacts, a little bit more so in North Carolina. That's the storyline for sure. So, again, as we're tracking things here, you can kind of see the isobars. It's a powerful storm, but again, center that's far away. But, eastern North Carolina, Outer Banks, maybe a little bit into Virginia, you're going to have some impacts that are a little bit more notable than other spots with that surge upwards of maybe worst case 4 feet above ground level in a few spots. So that's kind of storyline there. But again, you see the hurricane, with some of the information, and I'll pull it up just with this. This is a nasty storm for sure. As we're looking at the latest advisory, the 2 a.m. update, 100-mile-an-hour winds, moving north-northwest at 13, but we're getting more of a turn coming, and then 954 millibar depression. It's a powerful storm, not as powerful as it was, but category 2, and swimming at the U.S. East Coast beaches, many of them, most of them really remain dangerous over the next few days due to life-threatening rip currents. But if you're out of the water, not around the water, it's really isn't that big of a deal. This is not one for the record books, even though it was a Cat 5, sure, at one point out in the Atlantic. But as we're tracking things, it's Cat 2 now. If that was hitting land directly, it'd be an issue. It'd be a big deal. Don't get me wrong. Dora, You know, it was one of those storms that was similar strength, and it came on us. That was, just a historic deal for our local area in '64. This is 100 miles, hundreds of miles away. Rip Current risk a big deal here as we're looking as we're tracking things, but that's kind of the extent of it here locally. So, to North Carolina's Virginia way, tropical storm gust toward those eastern areas, and then also that surge there, especially in North Carolina, maybe upwards of 4 feet. So that's kind of the storyline here. We'll just pull up that Saffir-Simpson hurricane wind scale. It's a Cat 2, was a Cat 5. Even a Cat 1, even a tropical storm, if it was hitting directly, it'd be a big deal. Especially a stronger tropical storm, as we're looking as we're tracking. Some weaker ones can be a big deal as well. A real big deal. Alberto in 94 towards South Georgia, but, a lot of tropical storms, not as big of a deal, obviously. They're not maybe worthy of hyping up, but this is a hurricane. Some impacts, but not, the storm of the century by any stretch here toward the land areas here. As we're looking, that's not what this is by any stretch. We could have storms like that, in the next, months, years, and we've had plenty recently that deserve to be hyped up. This is not one of them, but still can be deadly toward the coast areas. There's a lot of different things, sadly, in meteorology that can be deadly, even if they're not just the overwhelming storyline, just big impact being felt toward areas widespread. So there's your hurricane, the loop of it. Thank you so much for tuning in here on this Tuesday, late Tuesday, early Wednesday. If you really need to, we'll cut in for getting, closest point, still a couple hundred miles from the North Carolina coast here, coming up toward early Thursday. If we need to cut in for that because of some of the impacts, we will. But you can go to clutter.com/tropics. I have the latest updates on the path and alerts there on the graphic that updates from the Hurricane Center. NHC.no.gov had some storm surge information as well, but it's more of a local storm system, in terms of North Carolina's impacts being enough to, have a little bit more coverage on those local stations, but not really a national story, not making landfall, not even coming close to making landfall toward the U.S. here. So that's kind of the storyline. We've talked so much about it. I probably talked too much about it, really. But still, there are some things to watch. It's unusual because we haven't had so many just direct hits from, terrible hurricanes the last decade or so in this country. This is not that. Definitely not that. So don't think it is. There's been a lot of hype, unwarranted hype, but the warranted hype needs to be around the rip currents. Those can and will be deadly as we look ahead in the timeline in the meteorology world with different events, whether it's just other events here. The rough surf is an issue, and storm surge in a little bit of North Carolina, could be a little bit dicey here. A few areas that are vulnerable could have problems. A few homes that are vulnerable, could, they're already on the edge. This could push them over the edge, but most folks are going to be all right. That's the storyline there. Most folks will be all right, but a few folks could have some problems. Have a great night. Stay safe.